Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound, and we're here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Hooray for Hollywood! Did you ever wonder how Hollywood, Los Angeles, became the entertainment capital of the world? Well, you know, it didn't have to be that way. If you'd have gone to Los Angeles in 1905, all you would have seen were oil wells and orange groves. It was an oil and agricultural community. What happened in Los Angeles and Hollywood happened very quickly between the years of 1909 and about 1916. In that time, it transformed itself into, well, the entertainment capital of the world. That's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at the motion picture industry as it existed and what it became. We're going to show you that the industry began on the East Coast, and it took quite some time for it to move out to the West Coast. And we're going to begin at the beginning. And when you're talking about technology in the 1890s, you're talking about Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison had a new invention. Well, not really a new invention, but an adaptation of existing technology that was different enough to allow him to patent it and basically jam up motion pictures for the better part of 20 years. But he was the man. And so we're going to start off looking at Thomas Edison. We'll be looking at the totality of the entertainment industry through 5 different lenses. The technology, we'll briefly go through the technology that was available and how movies were filmed. We'll go through the studios, were the primary source, they were the impetus for the entertainment industry. We'll then look at the directors, who were the first real stars of the movie industry, and then we'll look at the theaters, because once you've got big high-grossing films, you got to have large, wonderful theaters to show them in. And finally, we'll look at the stars, how they were marketed, and how much money those stars in the early 1900s actually made. So sit back and enjoy the story as we flip back. We go all the way out to West Orange, New Jersey in 1894. And what we have here is an article in the Akron Evening Times, January 17th, 1894. And Thomas Edison is being interviewed here with respect to, how his practice it works with respect to inventions, and then specifically how it works with his new invention, the kinetoscope. It says here, Thomas Edison's sound words of advice: keep your invention secret and manufacture the article yourself. Well, that's the advice he gives. He doesn't follow it, but his advice is to manufacture a device that the public wants, that saves time or money, and then produce it yourself. Don't waste your time patenting it, because someone will just steal your patent, produce the same thing, and you'll be tied up in litigation for 20 years. Which is exactly what's going to happen here with the kinetoscope. But the kinetoscope was an interesting thing. This is 1894. He actually developed 2 different items here. Well, what it was if he took film at 46 frames per second on 35 millimeter film, then he had them blown up slightly to postcard size. Then he would put 1,000 of them in a row on a wheel, and you'd look through the lenses of the kinetoscope machine while that turned at 46 frames per second, and it would produce, whatever he had filmed, a locomotive rolling into the station, or horses running, or whatever nonsensical thing the director could think of. That was the basic kinetoscope. But he also had a thing that I didn't realize, the kinetograph. That same machine could be married to one of his recording discs, one of his phonograph discs, and it would say if the film was 20 seconds long, he'd have a 20-second recording that would sync up with that, and you would actually get film with sound in 1894. Well, he didn't have a mechanism good enough to do that in a theater situation for projected film, but on the tabletop models, he was able to do that. And what was shown here, one film that was demonstrated to the reporter was actually kind of interesting. So let's look at it for a second here. It says here that the scene represented 3 men in a forge hammering a piece of red-hot iron. The picture was so perfect in action, perspective, and proportion that it was exactly the same as if the scene was looked at through a camera obscura. Every action of the men was shown. One suddenly threw down his hammer and motioned towards a bottle of lager beer on the ground. This was handed to him by one of the other men. He lifted it up to his mouth and took a long drink, and after handing it to the second man, he spat on his hands, grabbed his hammer, and began to pound the iron with renewed strength, as one would after having a bottle of lager beer. Now remember, Edison said, keep it safe. It was kind of like that Lord of the Rings thing, keep it safe, keep it, whatever Gandalf says in any event. Keep it safe, keep it hidden. He didn't do it. because competition comes the next year. And where does it come from? Well, it comes from William Kennedy Dixon. And who is William Kennedy Dixon? Well, it was one of Thomas Edison's engineers at his West Orange, New Jersey factory. He starts the American Mutoscope and Biograph Company that we'll refer to as Biograph from here on in. Biograph would become the premier maker of motion picture film from 1896 through to about 1918. And it was the first United States company devoted entirely to the production of film. Now, what kind of film would they make? Well, they would, the same sort of thing. It was day in the life stuff. It was animals. It was parades, cavalry charges, whatever they could. And they were done in little snippets, 10, 15, 20 second snippets. The largest films that they were making prior to about 1908 were what they called one-reelers. A reel was you bought the film in a reel, and it was 1,000 feet of film. And depending on circumstances, you could get anywhere from 11 to 15 minutes out of that 1,000 feet of film. So the longest film that they're going to have is an 11-minute one. Therefore, there was not much in the way of drama in the early 1900s. It was mostly, as I said, those nature scenes. You could do some slapstick comedy, and that became the second big rage after people had become sort of numb at just watching regular scenes of ordinary life. The main advantage that Biograph had over the Edison company was the fact that in order to avoid the patents mostly, they doubled the size of the film from 35 millimeter to 69 millimeter. And the 69 millimeter film actually has four times the surface area of the 35 millimeter, which means your pictures are 4 times as crisp. It was a better product, significantly better product than the Edison product. And that they continued to film in that manner up until they got into the longer films around 1908 when they went to the 35 millimeters as well. Now we have one of the first ads with respect to showing a film in the United States. It says here, Chicago Tribune, Sunday, December 27th, 1896, a splendid bill, the greatest of them all, the American Biograph, says owned and controlled by the American Mutoscope Company. It says producing views of nature, scenes with most perfect detail, the latest and finest device, several new pictures. So that's one of the first public displays, and certainly one of the first advertisements for motion picture film in the United States, 1896. On March 22nd, 1897, the Times-Union of Rochester, New York, does a wonderful job at summarizing how these films are projected. So this is the earliest newspaper article with respect to how a film is projected. Most people had no idea what was going on behind that little window at the small theaters. It says here, on a rude scaffolding high above the floor and against the wall separating the room from the theater proper stood the Biograph, the works enclosed in a long narrow box about 4 or 5 feet long and 3 or 4 feet high. It says, behind the powerful lens which projects the picture through an opening in the wall upon the large white screen on the stage below is a powerful arc lamp, the dazzling brilliancy of which is partially shaded from the operator's eyes by metal screens surrounding it. At the upper left-hand corner of the box is a wheel, or a reel, upon which is wound a continuous strip of the specially prepared celluloid film upon which the photographs are printed. This strip runs over an ingenious arrangement of pulleys down past the lens and over other wheels and another reel upon which it is wound as fast as the pictures are shown. But how do you make the illusion of motion? It says here, in front of the lens before which the pictures pass in quick rotation is a revolving shutter which cuts off the light between each of the many pictures, making up the moving scene as shown on the screen, and preventing any break or line of demarcation, marring the general effect. Now, where were these movies filmed? Where were they shot? Well, Edison established one of the first film studios in the world in West Orange, New Jersey, and he called it the Black Maria, or Maria. In any event, we've got a photograph of it here. And what's interesting about this particular studio is it had a louvered roof to allow in just as much light or shade as you needed. But most importantly, the entire device was on a wheel. It was on basically a roundhouse wheel, like on a railroad. the whole studio could be rotated to keep the sun in the proper perspective and get the right amount of light in. And as you're going to see, having enough light is probably the most important factor in making motion pictures, especially in 1906. Where were the movies shown? Well, in the early 1900s, they were shown in small converted theaters. The theaters were made out of converted storefronts. We have a picture here of the Charles Fox Amusement Company, courtesy of the Boston Post, and this is how it would have looked in about 1905. And the article of April 5th, 1921 said there's a good deal of difference between the Nickelodeon, where the movies were first seen, and the $5 million theater in New York, where 3,300 seats are sometimes not enough for the eager throngs anxious to see unusual films. It says here the first public exhibitions were given in vaudeville theaters. And the movie, well, and they continued to be done that way until the mid-1920s. The film would just be part of the vaudeville show. You know, you'd have a singer, a dancer, a juggler, someone telling off-color jokes, and then you would have 10 minutes of film. And that's how a lot of films were originally shown. They'd either be shown in a vaudeville theater or in a small converted storefront. It says here, but it was realized in the early days that there were thousands of people in every big city who wanted to see a cheaper show. Stores were hired and hurriedly made into small theaters. A pianist rattled off showy pieces of music. Then a lecturer explained in flowery phrases how wonderful was the entertainment that was about to be shown. Again, the small theaters were all that were necessary at that time. All you were watching were short 20-second through to 10-minute films. They were showed continuously throughout the day. It's when you get into larger films that are an hour and a half, 2 hours long, that you have your first scheduled times. The film's going to be showed at 2 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock. That you need, at that point in time, though, you need larger theaters because you're having fewer showings if you want to maximize your profits. Well, we've mentioned the concept of reels. Remember when we're dealing with this, reels are 11 to 15 minutes long. Your shorts are one-reelers. Your typical Max Sennett comedy or a Charlie Chaplin film would be 3 reels, half hour to 40 minutes, and then the big films would be 8, 10, and in the case of Birth of a Nation, which we're going to get into later, 12 reels long. Here's an article that outlines the problem with light, all right, that they're having on the East Coast here. So New York Tribune, January 23rd, 1904, it says, Vapor lights take moving picture, dance photographed at Biograph Studios by Cooper Hewitt Lamps. It goes, a stranger entering the studios of the American Mutoscope and Biograph Company at number 11 East 14th Street, and the studio was up on the roof, would have been startled at the sight of men and women in evening dresses, but with their lips purple, their eyes shot, and their complexions modeled as if in the first stages of an apoplectic fit. They were doing a dance sequence, and they were filming the dancers. It says here, the company's studio is said to be the only place in the world both equipped with sufficiently strong electric searchlights to make a moving picture of objects in motion and large enough for a dance. It says, soon after 11 p.m. and for several minutes involving a picture of the revolving dancers was taken with sufficient light being diffused at that time to illuminate a town of 50,000 inhabitants, and 1,800 feet of film was taken. So it's a huge deal. The amount of artificial light that's needed to film aggressive moving pictures is the same as to light a small city. Much better if you can use natural light, and that's going to lead us down the road here. But before we get there, we got to investigate the amazing thing that Fort Lee, New Jersey was. You've probably never heard of Fort Lee, New Jersey, but for about 10 years, Fort Lee, New Jersey was the movie capital of the world. Why on earth would that be? Well, Biograph had its film studios in New York City, and New York City real estate is expensive. And nobody wants, if they can, to be in New York City if they don't have to be. So they look just down the Hudson River, and we run into Fort Lee, New Jersey. And it became the center for Universal Studios, the Independent Moving Pictures, Peerless Pictures, Solax Studios, Goldwyn Pictures, which would become Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Fox Film Corporation, Society Pathé Pictures of France, and it became the go-to place for movie production from about 1905 through 1917, 1918, until finally the West Coast would overtake it. It didn't have anything to commend it other than cheap land and it always is good for industries to be located together, and you can steal the other guy's secrets, plus the other guys can, on a good day, can help you out. So Fort Lee, New Jersey became a center of movie production, and it's a town that nobody knows and or cares for anymore. Now, Edison was never like to leave well enough alone. If he could squeeze more money out of something, he would. He was sort of a businessman that used a sledgehammer approach here rather than a rapier. It says here, well, he had the great idea of why not form a monopoly. Despite the Sherman Antitrust Act, why not try to form an absolute monopoly and to the benefit of me and my friends and the large companies and keep out all the competition. So that's what he did in 1908. Here's the headline in the Finger Lakes Times, Geneva, New York, February 18th, 1908. Moving picture men combine. 8 concerns will undertake to control entire business in the country. Can you imagine if that was a headline in the Wall Street Journal today? A couple guys are going to get together and they're going to control the entire industry in the country. Our explicit purpose is to crush people. It says here, in order to secure complete control of the moving picture business of the country, representing an investment of $53 million, 8 of the leading American and French manufacturers formed an $8 million combination. $53 million is like $1.5 billion. It says the combination should be undermined, to dictate terms to 100 rental agents and 4,200 playhouses and 5-cent picture places throughout the country. The new combination will start business March the 1st, and at that time it is said the cost of the picture films will be largely increased. You normally want to have like production at scale in order to decrease things, but no, they want to increase the cost here. It says here, 8 concerns in combination. The rules adopted by the combined manufacturers will be strictly enforced, and it is said, and it is frankly announced, like they're all above. It's all above board. This is what they're going to do. That those who do not live up to their terms will be forced out of the business. They're going to crush you. They're making that as a bold statement in 1908. The manufacturers protest that they have not formed a trust, of course not, and that the rules which they have adopted are solely for the protection of the public. I've been reading this thing for about a minute and a half, and I haven't found not 1 second that looks like it's for the benefit of any public. They declare that it is only through the elimination of excessive competition that they will be able to guarantee the public the protection of all the latest and most improved devices by the expenditure of large sums of money, which could not be safely invested under uncertain business conditions. So the only certain business condition that they think is suitable is an absolute and total monopoly. Crazy. And the companies involved were the Lubin Company in Philadelphia, Vitagraph of New York, Selig & Company, and Kalem of Chicago. There were actually 2 major film manufacturers in Chicago at that time. 2 French films, Pathé and as well as Thomas Edison and the Kodak Company. Edison had a sort of a scam rigged up with Kodak where you could only use Kodak film in the Edison cameras, and that becomes a subject of litigation. Headline is, it couldn't be more blatant. I just can't imagine this. The sub-headline is, will control business. The combination will also insist on having all operators of moving picture machines licensed. They declare that they will seek as far as possible to have laws passed in every state for licensing operators. You don't have to have a license to run a film projector, but they're going to make you do it. Why? To increase costs and make the entry point for competition so high that nobody else can enter the business. And these 8 companies are going to control the entire industry with all the money being tithed up to Thomas Edison at all points. Well, they can't win them all. Like the movie industry can't win everything here. And the movie and motion picture industry is being sort of shaken out at this point in time with what you can and what you can't film. And here's a headline in the Buffalo Times, May 6, 1908, Moving Pictures and Copyright Law. Judge Lacombe, sitting in the United States Circuit Court, has handed down a decision in which he declares that moving picture shows come within the copyright laws and that the exhibition of films of scenes from copyrighted plays or books are violations of copyright in that they are pantomimes and therefore theatrical productions. One of the guys at Kalem and Company out of Chicago was trying to put Ben-Hur on the big screen without paying the publishers, which was at that time Harper Brothers. You can't do that, and the courts are wise enough to rule that you got to pay. You got to pay royalties in that perspective. But despite the monopolies, the moving picture business enjoys a frenzied boom, says the Baltimore Sun. how the films are distributed to the country's 5,000 5-cent theaters. And at that point in time, it's estimated there are 5,000 theaters in America, all showing the films in both forms, in both the tabletop and the projected versions here. They get into the exquisite, this is a detailed breakdown here. It gets into an exquisite detail here on how films are produced and what small profit margins there are. They're talking about the production of the film is the primary expense is the purchase and development of the film. And they demonstrate in the article that it takes 23 or 25 rentals to get your money back on the film. But the problem with film in 1907, 1908, it's very volatile and very fragile. And by the time you've rented it out 23 or 25 times, it's in a sorry shape, and it's very difficult to get additional rentals out on that. So your profit margins are incredibly thin because by the time you're making money, your product is just about destroyed. One of the funny things in the article is that they notice that business in the motion picture business has been doubling, almost doubling every 6 months. But they say that the limit is not far away. The sub-headline, the limit's not far off. They think they're hitting the limit. They're hitting the outer edge of the envelope and just how much entertainment, motion picture entertainment, the American public can absorb. This is still in the infancy of motion pictures. It's kind of funny. They probably weren't 1/10 of the way there, but they're worried and thought that they had reached the limit of what was possible here. It says here, though, give the public what it wants. Like most amusement enterprises, the movie picture business passed through a disreputable state. Those who cater to the public seem never to wholly realize that the public, as a rule, does not care for the salacious and suggestive subjects of entertainment. I don't know what world they're living in, but that was their opinion at the time. It says, not long ago, suggestive pictures were the vogue in moving picture theaters. That was in the days when a moving picture parlor was a disreputable place. Then enterprising men began to cater to the better classes, and the present rage began. You know what? They might be right, because the real money starts coming in right around now, just around 1909, when you start getting, we're going to get to Mary Pickford and other stars, and the business really does boom. Now, who's making films, and what kind of films are they making in that pre-California era? We have an article here, the Bedford Daily Mail, not Bedford Falls from It's a Wonderful Life, but the Bedford Daily Mail, Bedford, Indiana, July 9th, 1909. It says here, of the many great feature films made by the Selig Polyscope Company, and that's one of the ones out of Chicago, In the Sultan's Power is the best. See it at the Majestic Theater tonight. It tells the adventures of a young American in love with the daughter of a French nobleman who is forced by her father to wed Oman Bey, a Turk, and of the attempted rescue of the girl by the American. So they're making three-reelers. So all across the United States, up from New Jersey to Chicago, they're making three-reelers of the dramatic type. And the Selig Polyscope Company, which you've never heard of, because few people have, was interesting. They actually talking about stars, they actually gave the first chances to several guys that you've heard of. Tom Mix, you've heard of Tom Mix because you watched the Beverly Hillbillies, and the Beverly Hillbillies in 1962. We're still watching Tom Mix movies. Harold Lloyd and Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle all began in Selig Polyscope Company. The Selig Company also invented the concept of the cliffhanger. You know, those serial dramas where at the end of the 20 minutes, the hero's in jeopardy, and it ends like those episodes of Batman in the 1960s. Then you got to go to the next episode to see how the cliffhanger resolved. Well, they invented that entire concept, which brings us at this point in time. That's 1909. 1909 brings us to California. And the first people to go to California specifically to film a motion picture. And it's the Biograph Company with their premier director, D.W. Griffith, who we're going to hear a lot of here. And he goes out there to film a movie called Ramona. Now, what's Ramona? Ramona is something it's something you're going to see Hollywood resort to 1,000 times over. It's a screen adaptation of a popular novel. And it's a Western. It's a romantic Western involving, it's a cowboys and Indians with emphasis on the Indians and how unfairly they were treated by the cowboys. It says, Ramona, a story of the white man's injustice to the Indian. There are few American novels better known than the story of Ramona, told by Helen Jackson. Intensely interesting, thrilling without sensationalism, it most graphically illustrates the white man's injustice to the Indian. So why go out to California to film? Well, because the movie is the book is set in California. And it says, realizing what a gratification the depiction of this favorite novel with absolute authenticity would be to the patrons of motion pictures, the Biograph Company made the journey to Ventura County, where were found the identical locations and buildings wherein Mrs. Jackson placed her characters. So they were able to go right to the scene, right to the location of the places that were the scenes in the novel, and to accurately recreate them in the film. And that's the first time anybody had done that. And good luck shooting outside. Good luck shooting outside in the spring in New Jersey with 1905 equipment. It only makes sense if you can guarantee the weather. And that's one of the prime impetuses for moving the movie industry out to California. Here we have the ad for that film in the Gettysburg Times, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, July 30th, 1910. It's at the Walter Theater tonight. 3 reels. Well, so it's a film of about 40, 45 minutes, and it's advertising Ramona, a story of the white man's injustice to the Indian. But the most important thing in the ad is the little headline, "The Coolest Place in Town." It's 1910. Air conditioning has just started to come into theaters in America in 1907, 1908, 1910. So this would have been one of the coolest places in America. And if you've ever been to Gettysburg on July 30th, 1910, any year, July 30th, it can be 93 degrees there. So being in a theater watching Ramona is probably a pretty good idea. Here's a headline. Well, a prescient headline in the Los Angeles Herald, Los Angeles, California, January 24th, 1910. Motion pictures to be made in California. First recognition in a paper that people are coming here to film. It says Southern California, with its sunshine and flowers in midwinter, has attracted another class of industry by reason of the glorious prevailing conditions. The Biograph Company of New York has sent a troupe of motion picture artists clear across the continent that they may work unhampered by the snow or the cold. The company, numbering 32 actors, actresses, artists, and cameramen, arrived in Los Angeles last evening and are registered at the Hall and Beck Hotel. Well, you guess you can go out there and see them. They intend to spend the winter here making pictures with California scenery as the background. Couldn't think of a nicer thing to do in 1910. So movies are catching on, and the newspapers are catching on, and it's becoming a source of news. Here's an article in the Los Angeles Times, Sunday, October 16th, 1910. Films thrive here. Moving pictures enterprise developed rapidly along educational, news, advertising, private, and theatrical ways, headed for Los Angeles. They're trying to justify the many ways in which film can be used, and why Los Angeles is a wonderful place for all of it. It says, among the tourists who are beating it for California, flying from the cold weather, are 4 or 5 moving picture companies with their actors, scenery, and costumes. It will be a big winter in that regard. Talks about the Selig people from Chicago. They've actually bought a location. They bought and are in the process of remodeling space in Edendale, California. The American Biograph Company, which was out here, it mentions in the article, was out here last year, is now looking for space and maybe looking to establish a permanent studio. And the Vitagraph Company is sending people down to San Diego. And then, in a justification, this is an interesting paragraph. It says justification. If you were to substitute the word biograph, which is their term for a moving picture camera and projector, if you were to substitute the word biograph for internet in 1990 or iPhone in 2020, you'd see what I mean here. It says, in the opinion of both educators and picture men, a biograph will be part of the equipment of every schoolhouse in the very near future, and geography lessons will be learned from a motion picture screen. Just like everyone thought that, most guys still think that the internet's essential for learning, and that iPhones and all the lunacy are essential for learning. Maybe, maybe not, but it just shows you the consistency with which that type of idea is adopted by progressives over time. Now, the Biograph Company, which we told you is the biggest manufacturer of films in America at the time, finally makes the Los Angeles Evening Express Tuesday, January 13th, 1914. Biograph Company finally arrives in Los Angeles. There is joy in moving picture circles today. The Biograph Company has arrived, and everyone wants to be in line to greet them. In a special train of 9 cars, they reached the Santa Fe Depot soon after noon, direct from New York. The Biograph studio, Pico in Georgia, has been in readiness for some time, and the company is taking possession and making itself a home here this afternoon. So Biograph is moving the operation lock, stock, and barrel out to California in 1914. But before Biograph got there in 1914, they lost their biggest star, and that was their director, D.W. Griffith. D.W. Griffith became, he wanted something bigger. He wanted something bigger than shooting just three-reelers and, Max Sennett type comedies and that. He wanted to do something big. And so he joins with a couple buddies of his, and he becomes one of the founding people behind Reliance Majestic Studios, a studio that lasted for some time in the late teens, early 20s. He goes after it in a big way. He negotiates the film rights to the novel The Klansman, which he's going to make into a movie, Birth of a Nation. Well, there's the first article in the Los Angeles Times about that. It says D.W. Griffith is wrestling with 100 or so colored gentlemen. That's what they said. Out at the Mutual Studios this week, making a stupendous production of Thomas Edison Jr., The Klansman. The forces at work in a transplanted bit of the Old South that reflects credit on the scenic and carpentering forces. So they're recreating the Old South on location out in the valley. And Thomas Edison Jr. has sold the movie rights to The Klansman to D.W. Griffith. And what did he sell? What did he get for that? It's funny, as an aside, it was probably the most lucrative. It was one of the most lucrative film rights contracts ever entered into. Originally, D.W. Griffith offered him $10,000 for the rights, but filming was ongoing and they were running short of money. So he said, if instead of taking the other $7,500, would you be okay with taking 25% of the net profits? And he said yes. Reluctantly, he said yes. And that 25% of the net profits turned into millions, which in today's dollars are tens of scores of millions of dollars that Mr. Dixon made for his novel. Now, why did he make so much money? Because Birth of a Nation was beyond a sensation. Now, it is recognized that, how's the easiest way to say it? It's a filmatic masterpiece and a sociological disaster. The themes in it are abhorrent, but the technical quality of the film, the fact that it goes for 3 hours of uninterrupted action, all of the techniques that were used in the 1930s and 40s for filming action films were developed by D.W. Griffith in Birth of a Nation. And we have here an ad from the Los Angeles Times, Sunday, September 5th, 1915. The film's going to play at the Clunes Theater Auditorium, which is a Broadway type theater that seats 3,000 people. It says here, 21st big week starts tomorrow. 241 performances. They're showing 2 performances a day, nearly 3,000 seats by reservation only, and it's sold out, and it will play at that theater for 7 months. And it plays just like that all around the nation. Now, it doesn't play without protests, especially in the Northeast. It is beyond a sensation. It's a focal point like no other film that has ever been produced. It's still controversial. It says here in the Los Angeles Times, Wednesday, May 5th, 1915, War News. Judging from the clipping from the Boston papers brought back by David Griffith in a large-sized suitcase, the news of the present war was all crowded out by the war news stirred up by the Klansmen. So it's a big issue out there. Mr. Griffith stated yesterday there is a fight on in Massachusetts to pass a law prohibiting the showing of any theatrical exhibit, including motion pictures, which is calculated to stir up race feelings. According to the telegram received by him yesterday, the governor and members of the state legislature attended in a body a showing of The Klansman, or Birth of a Nation, in order to see for themselves whether or not the film was objectionable. Now, not only did they see it in a special viewing, President Wilson saw it at the White House, and the 9 Supreme Court justices saw it in a private showing as well. People were afraid of this film, but they weren't afraid to go see it. And it broke all box office records and would remain the box office king until another controversial film, Gone with the Wind, in 1939. And it's hard to say which of those films has had more viewership. Birth of a Nation, a lot of the viewership was on the slide. People had to see what it was about without approving of its contents. Now, D.W. Griffith became the first celebrity director. And we've talked at the beginning that there were 5 things involved in making films. You had to have the technology, which we've looked at. You had to have the studios, which we've looked at. Now, the directors became stars. D.W. Griffith is the first one. The second film that he makes in 1916 is called Intolerance. And we've got photograph here of one of the scenes from Intolerance. Intolerance was a historical movie going back in history and showing 4 different episodes where People were intolerant. The one that stands out, though, is the sack of Babylon, and that's what we have the photograph here. The scenery for this is unbelievable. It's over 100 feet tall. Those little people on there are actual little people. Today, this would all be done with miniatures and CGI, but there they built an exact replica of what the walls of Babylon looked like. It's unbelievable. And it just shows you that, look, the film industry is theirs. No one's going to build a set for $100,000 in 1916 unless they have some reasonable expectation of recouping their expense, which they did. Intolerance wasn't the hit that Birth of a Nation was, but it made its money back and established D.W. Griffith as the director supreme of epics. But until our next director comes along, because our next director, he's got a background in stage. He comes from the New York stage. He's a director producer. But in 1913, he decides to take a swing at movies. And our man is Cecil B. DeMille. And Cecil B. DeMille comes out west. He comes out west and he directs a movie called Squaws Man. Sounds politically incorrect. It is politically incorrect. It's a Western. It's a Western, but it's a modern Western. Here's the headline from the Los Angeles Times, February 22, 1915. It says, fresh setting for old plays. Squaw Man's faults lost in fine production. Dustin Farman stars again in frontier drama. And Dustin Farman was a leading man at the time, and he's one of he'll be an example of one of our last items that we need, actors, all right? So the film is a smash, and it's an absolute smash, and it enables DeMille to continue on his career. Well, he's the man. He becomes the man for 30 years. If you're making a sword and sandal epic like the Ten Commandments, he's your go-to guy. He out D.W. Griffiths D.W. Griffiths, and his career will last into the 50s. But the movie I like best with Cecil B. DeMille in it is Sunset Boulevard, for his cameo, where he plays Norma Desmond's director in that famous concluding scene where she's ready for her close-up, Mr. DeMille. 1917, we've reached 1916, and in 1917, we finally have the resolution of the litigation surrounding the monopolistic merger back in 1908. And this decision, which is correctly decided, frees up the motion picture industry once and for all, and really opens the door for full production in California. It says here, in the case of Motion Picture Patents Company against Universal Film Manufacturing Company, the court holds that owners of motion picture projection machines may employ such film as they please for exhibition, even though their machines were manufactured under patents, and as purchased, they were forbidden to use in them any film supplied by other than those controlled by the patents upon the machine. So basically, you can use any darn film you want. You don't have to use the Kodak film that came with the camera, and that kills Edison's control over the motion picture industry and allows a lower point of entry, and you have a flood of smaller studios opening up, and almost all of them in California. And so whereby in 1910, 99% of films would have been produced on the East Coast. By 1915, 60% of the films are produced in California. By 1920, 80% of the films are produced in California. And where would those films, those new big films be shown? Well, we've got a series. Well, you need an entrepreneur. You need a man. You got to have a guy come along with the capital and the foresight to build movie palaces, and that's Sid Grauman. The first film palace that he produces or builds is Sid Grauman's $1 Million Theater in Los Angeles. We've got a photograph of it here. We got a couple photographs of the outside. One of the outside photographs has a 20-foot high picture of Harold Lloyd on it. One of Harold's films was debuting there in 1920. And we also have a picture of the wonderful interior. These things really were palaces. And the first of them came in 1918, 1919. And by 1930, every major city had their own Fox Theater or Gem Theater, showing movies to 2,500, 3,000 people at a pop. That leaves us with only one item, one entity that we haven't dealt with, and that is actors. You got to have stars, and you got to have stars that the public loves. And what's interesting, before 1909 or so, the stars were the actual actors and actresses received no billing on the movies. For the most part, they were just the character. The studio or the director were the ones that were being promoted. It wasn't until actresses like Mary Pickford, 1908, 1909, started receiving fan mail, 25, in Mary Pickford's place, 25 or so letters a day, most of them asking just what's her name, we need to know. There's a nice article in the Springfield Daily Republic, Springfield, Massachusetts, November 1, 1925, that's headlined, "That $25 a week job of Mary Pickford's. Interesting revelations on how the now famous star made her humble start in the screen in the days of its crude beginnings." And they go in that article to recount how she came from Toronto, that she was on the stage at age 5. She was the sole breadwinner for her whole family, that she started in films with Biograph at $25 a week, and that she became known as the Biograph Girl. Before people knew that she was Mary Pickford, she was the Biograph Girl. But they soon would learn that she's Mary Pickford, so that by 1914, we have this El Paso Times ad that says, "Today only, Wigwam Theater. 2 more choice pictures from the Mary Pickford reissues, An Arcadian Maid and Just Like a Woman." So she's now the point person with respect to promoting films. But it does also say, "Do not miss one of these splendid Biograph pictures. D.W. Griffith directed both." So now they're pushing the stars and the directors. And how much money would Mary Pickford make? Well, she went from making $25 a week in 1909 to by 1916, her contract was this: $10,000 a week. That's $520,000 for the year, plus I can't believe the contract, plus 50% of the net profits of the film. Now, Hollywood has a great way of reducing gross profits to net profits to nothing. But even with Hollywood pointy penciled accountants, she made more than $1 million in both 1916 and 1917, and it was enough money that she was able, along with Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, to form their own studio, United Artists. And she never looked back. Made more money in the late teens, 1920s, than any other person, other than maybe Charlie Chaplin. But I've never liked Charlie. I always found him to be a bit rude. I'm a Buster Keaton kind of guy. Now we have reached. Well, no, what we haven't reached, because we haven't talked about the slight bit of the future here. You know, the movie industry was set up in the 19-teens in Los Angeles. The entertainment industry was set up because it had what was necessary in order to film the movies. And because it had all of those resources, it was able to establish a monopoly type of position in the development of manufacturing of films. And American films became the worldwide standard. And that was the way it was for 100 years until now. Until in the last 5-10 years. Nobody needs Hollywood anymore. You don't need the sound stages. You don't need the location shooting. You certainly don't need the unions and the taxes. It's become so expensive to film in Los Angeles that they've almost priced themselves out of the market. And with new technology and AI coming along, who knows in 5 years whether any of this will be relevant. But it's nice to know that it was, and they did provide us with 110 years of entertainment. So let's tip our glass. Let's tip our glass to the Hollywood film industry. And why don't we do it with our own themed cocktail? It's an actual cocktail. It's the Hollywood. Now, this is one that's going to use egg whites. So you people that are a little squeamish out there, use pasteurized egg whites. Real men and others, just use the egg whites of half an egg. So here's what we got: 3 ounces of white rum, a tablespoon of pink grapefruit juice, freshly squeezed, a teaspoon of grenadine, and a teaspoon of simple syrup, and then 1/2 of an egg white. And we're going to do this is a wet shake, dry shake methodology here. The dry shake comes first. You put the ingredients into your cocktail shaker and shake the heck out of it for 20 seconds. That's to emulsify the egg white and properly mix it. Then half fill the container with ice, recap it, and shake the heck out of it for another 20 seconds. Then strain that into a chilled coupe glass. Now, our coupe glass is our favorite. That's that 1930s champagne glass. Strain it into there and garnish it with little shaved nutmeg, and raise a toast to Hollywood. Hooray for Hollywood! And there we are. Now we'll see you next week. In the meantime, if you stayed this long, please like and subscribe. It's super important for the continuation of the enterprise. So good luck, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye.